It's hard to explain the way the world tilts when something you were never meant to see suddenly becomes impossible to unsee. How a single image on a screen can detonate every assumption you've built your life around, leaving you standing there with a phone in your hand and a heartbeat that feels like it's collapsing in on itself. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed, the glow from her screen still burning into my eyes, scrolling through photo after photo that didn't belong to the relationship I thought we had, poses meant for someone else, angles meant for someone else, a version of her I had never been invited to know. And then the messages, the travel plans, the ring glinting on her finger in pictures taken hundreds of miles away in a city she said she hated, all of it blurring together until my hands were shaking too hard to keep going. The betrayal didn't arrive as anger. It came as a cold, hollow quiet, the kind that makes your body feel too heavy for itself. I kept staring at the doorway, waiting for her to walk in, waiting for some explanation that could stitch my reality back together. But all I heard was the echo of my own breath in a room that suddenly felt foreign. And as the truth kept revealing itself piece by devastating piece, only one question remained. How do you ever trust someone again when the person you loved was living an entirely different life behind your back? Before everything unraveled, I used to believe I was a good judge of character. My name is Darren, and for nearly 3 years I thought I understood the woman I fell in love with, Lila. Someone who walked into my life with a kind of soft confidence that made me feel grounded in ways I didn't know I needed. We met at a friend's gathering. She stood at the edge of the room, sipping wine, laughing quietly at a joke I didn't hear, and somehow her presence felt like an invitation. Our first conversations flowed effortlessly. Our early months were full of late-night drives and shared playlists, and over time we built something that looked, at least from my perspective, like stability. I wasn't naive enough to think relationships were perfect, but ours felt comfortable, trustworthy, rooted in honesty. It wasn't until the night I found her phone buzzing on the kitchen counter, screen lighting up with a message from a name I didn't recognize, that I realized how blind a person can be when they trust someone too deeply. It happened on a quiet Thursday evening. She had fallen asleep early on the couch, exhausted from a long week of travel for a photography job she said required her to visit clients in nearby cities. I didn't question it because her career had always involved unpredictable schedules and spontaneous assignments. Sometimes she'd drive 2 hours for a sunrise shoot or spend a whole weekend in a small town capturing weddings. I admired her passion for her work and the independence it gave her. That night, while I cleaned the dishes, her phone buzzed repeatedly, 3 messages in a row, then another. It wasn't unusual for her clients to reach out late, but the frequency made me glance over. I didn't intend to open it. Curiosity doesn't always come from suspicion. Sometimes it comes from distraction. But when the preview showed a picture, one unmistakably intimate, the kind no client would ever send, my hand reached for the phone before my mind had time to stop it. The first thing that struck me wasn't the content itself, but how familiar and unfamiliar she looked in the photo. The pose, the expression, the vulnerability. It was her, but a version of her she never shared with me. A version crafted intentionally for someone else. I stared at it, frozen, my pulse thudding in my ears. The air around me seemed to thicken. I swiped open the thread, not out of anger, but out of disbelief, wanting, needing to see if there had been some mistake. But there wasn't. The messages were explicit, affectionate, deeply personal, filled with inside jokes and references that belonged to a world I was never invited into. Scrolling felt like peeling back layers of a life she lived parallel to mine. There were photos she had taken in hotel rooms I'd never seen her stay in, wearing clothes I never knew she owned, sending words I never heard spoken aloud. My stomach tightened as I read further, and that's when I saw it, the ring. A photo of her hand delicately resting on a balcony railing, a simple but elegant diamond catching the sunlight. The caption beneath it read, "Can't wait until this is official." Another message followed. "Soon, my love. Just a little longer and we'll finally be together." I don't remember how long I stood there, the phone trembling in my hands as my brain scrambled to make sense of the impossibility unfolding on the screen. It wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't just deceit. It was an entire identity she had kept hidden, an engagement to someone miles away in a city she claimed to avoid because it was too hectic, too pretentious, too crowded. Yet here she was, posing on balconies in that same city, wearing a ring another man had given her, promising him a future while building a life with me. I put the phone down like it had burned me and walked to the living room, staring at her as she slept peacefully on the couch. Her hair was messy, her breathing steady, her face calm, so deceptively calm for someone leading two lives with such ease. I watched her, trying to find signs of duplicity in her features, some trace of the woman who had written those messages. But she looked like the person I loved. The person who made me pancakes on Sundays, who left little sketches on notes for me, who rested her head on my shoulder during movies. The contrast between the woman in front of me and the woman on the phone screen split something inside me. Something fragile I hadn't realized depended on her honesty to survive. The next morning, I didn't confront her. She walked into the kitchen yawning, stretching, greeting me with a soft smile and a kiss on the cheek as though nothing in the world was wrong. I felt my chest tighten under the weight of the truth sitting in my pocket. The truth I had read in her phone, the truth that had already begun rewriting our entire history. I watched her pour coffee, humming to herself, moving through the kitchen with the same ease she always had. A part of me wanted to scream. Another part wanted to pretend I had imagined everything. But the largest part wanted answers, and answers required patience. She left that afternoon, claiming she had a meeting with a potential client 2 towns over. I nodded, pretending to believe her, pretending to be the same man she had been lying to for months. As soon as she left, I sank into the chair at the table and stared at the space she had occupied moments earlier, trying to understand how many times she had walked out the door with a kiss and an excuse while heading toward a man who believed he was her fiancé. The betrayal seemed multi-layered, not just about cheating, but about the acting, the pretending, the emotional fluency required to maintain 2 relationships without either one discovering the other. That night, I dug deeper. Not into her phone, but into her patterns. I replayed memories, sifted through her stories, looked at her travel schedule. So many of her trips overlapped with the city where her secret fiancé lived. So many of her late-night editing sessions had coincided with messages she had sent him. So many of her odd mood swings made sense now, not stress, not artistic frustration, but guilt, confusion, fear of slipping up. The first real crack came a week later when she told me she needed to attend a 3-day photography workshop. She showed me the website, the registration confirmation, even the hotel booking, all legitimate as far as I could tell. But when I looked closer, her hotel was in the same neighborhood where her fiancé lived. Something inside me hardened. I knew I needed the truth, not speculation. And the only way to get it was to follow her. I waited until she left early Friday morning. She thought I had work. I had taken the day off. I followed her car from a distance, the entire drive feeling like a surreal nightmare. I was somehow still awake inside. She didn't turn toward the workshop venue. She drove straight into the city she insisted she despised. My heart pounded as I watched her enter an upscale apartment building, a building I had seen in the background of the photo she had sent to the other man. She wasn't attending a workshop. She wasn't meeting clients. She was visiting the man she had promised her future to. I parked down the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel as tightly as my own unraveling sanity. Hours passed. She didn't emerge. At one point, I saw a silhouette on the balcony. Hers, recognizable even from a distance. She was laughing, leaning into someone whose shadow moved close behind her. Something in my chest cracked quietly, the kind of break that doesn't shatter so much as collapse inward. I didn't confront her then. I didn't storm the building. I didn't demand an explanation. I needed time to understand what I had seen, what it meant, how deeply I had been deceived. When she returned home Sunday evening, she walked through the door with the same bright smile, the same enthusiastic story about the workshop, the same confident lie she had perfected. She kissed me, unpacked her bag, showed me photos she claimed were from the event. Each lie layered itself over the truth like a blanket trying to smother a fire. It wasn't until days later when I dug deeper, into her email, her travel receipts, the background metadata on some of her photos, that the full picture emerged. She wasn't just cheating. She wasn't just living a double life. She had been planning a future with him while constructing a present with me. She had accepted his proposal 6 months earlier. She had attended family dinners with him. She had been introduced as his fiancée in circles I knew nothing about. And yet here she was, cooking dinner in my kitchen, laughing at my jokes, building routines with me as though our lives were seamlessly intertwining. It made no sense, until I realized she didn't actually have two separate lives. She had one fractured identity, split down the middle, and she was standing on both sides hoping neither half would collapse. I finally understood the quiet tension she carried, the unpredictable moods, the sudden tears, the reluctance to talk about the future with me. I understood the exhaustion in her eyes after trips, the nervous way she reacted to unexpected calls, the way she always changed the subject when marriage came up. She hadn't been unsure about us. She had been unsure which life she wanted. But a person cannot love two futures at once. Eventually, one must destroy the other. And as I sat there in the dim light of our living room, watching her fold laundry and talk about weekend plans as if our reality hadn't been built on a foundation of lies, I finally realized the truth that hurt more than anything else. She wasn't choosing me. She was choosing on the version of herself she could be with him. And my place in her life had never been as secure as I believed. The night everything finally came apart wasn't loud or cinematic. It didn't erupt in shouting or accusations or slammed doors. Instead, it unfolded with a quiet inevitability, like a storm that had been building so long you no longer bothered checking the sky. It started when she came home late again, claiming traffic, claiming delays, claiming excuses I had already memorized. She dropped her bag by the door and kissed my cheek casually, unaware that I had spent the entire afternoon staring at the truth laid out in front of me. The photos from her trips, the timestamps she hadn't bothered to edit, the emails confirming hotel stays booked under her name but paid for under his, the engagement announcement draft she had saved in her notes app, as if planning to reveal it when the timing felt right. She walked around our home with a gentle ease, humming softly, tidying pillows, lighting a candle. For a few surreal minutes, I watched her move through the space as if she belonged there, as if her presence hadn't already fractured my reality into pieces too jagged to hold. I didn't approach her immediately. Instead, I observed her with a kind of detached clarity, noticing details I had ignored before, the slight tremor in her hands when she checked her phone, the way her eyes flickered toward the window every time a car passed, the subtle weariness in her shoulders as if she was constantly bracing for something. She looked like someone living inside a lie so tightly woven she didn't know how to breathe outside of it. When she finally settled on the couch, I sat across from her and said her name as evenly as I could. She looked up, smiling faintly at first, but the smile faded the moment she saw my expression. Something inside her seemed to recognize the truth before I spoke it. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't throw accusations, I didn't ask questions I already had answers to. Instead, I placed my phone on the table between us, the screen open to the album of photos I had found. Her gaze dropped to it slowly, like someone watching a fuse burn toward an inevitable explosion. She didn't reach for it. She didn't deny anything. She simply exhaled, a soft, shattering sound, and leaned back as if her entire body had been stripped of strength. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The silence felt heavier than any argument could have been. When she finally did speak, her voice was barely above a whisper. She didn't ask how I found the photos. She didn't ask which messages I had read. She didn't question what I knew. Instead, the first thing she said was, "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." The sentence was so painfully misguided that I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it illuminated the truth more clearly than anything else. She had been planning a timeline for her betrayal, a sequence of events where she controlled the narrative, where she explained herself gently, where her choices made sense in the light she cast on them. But reality had exposed her before she was ready. She tried to explain, haltingly, shakily, how the engagement had happened. She said it started with a reunion during a photography job in his city. She said reconnecting with him brought back parts of herself she thought she had lost. She said he had changed, grown, become someone who made her feel seen in ways she struggled to articulate. She said their bond had reignited faster than she expected, becoming emotional before she recognized the danger, becoming physical before she admitted the truth to herself, becoming a commitment before she realized she was still living a life with me. I listened, but her words passed through me like echoes in an empty hallway. I wasn't looking for justification. I wasn't looking for remorse. I wasn't even looking for a reason. People don't accidentally become engaged. People don't accidentally build two futures at once. People don't accidentally kiss another man on balconies overlooking a skyline they claim to hate. What I wanted, what I needed, was the truth beneath the truth. So I asked her directly, "Did you ever plan on telling me?" She hesitated. Her eyes filled in a way that suggested guilt, not grief. She finally murmured, "I planned to, but I didn't know how. I thought maybe one day it would feel right." The words pierced me more deeply than any photo could have. I wasn't a partner in her story. I was an obstacle, one she planned to remove only when it became convenient. She hadn't been wrestling with loyalty. She had been managing her double life until she could transition seamlessly into the future she preferred. I asked her another question. "Why stay with me at all?" Her breath caught. She looked genuinely conflicted, as if this was the question she had been avoiding, not just with me, but with herself. "Because I still love you," she said quietly. "Just not in the way I used to." The strange thing was, I believed her, not because her betrayal made sense, but because love isn't always clean or exclusive or logical. Sometimes it fractures into different shapes, attaching itself to multiple people in ways that feel comforting and destructive at the same time. She loved me out of habit, out of history, out of comfort. But she loved him with the version of herself she wished she could be. I didn't tell her I loved her too. Not because it wasn't true, but because love no longer felt relevant. Love had become the background noise beneath a truth too loud to ignore. The conversation stretched on for hours. At times she cried, at times she apologized, at times she stared blankly at the wall as if trying to locate the moment her life veered off course. But with every explanation, every confession, every attempt to express her confusion, the distance between us grew wider. We weren't partners talking through a crisis. We were two strangers trying to define the wreckage of a life they had accidentally entangled. The decision to separate didn't come as a dramatic declaration. It came as a quiet realization that neither of us could ignore. She admitted she couldn't continue living a lie. I admitted I couldn't remain in a relationship where trust had been erased so completely. There was no argument, no pleading, no ultimatum. Just a mutual understanding that the relationship had already ended long before the words were spoken. She packed a small bag that night, not out of punishment, but because staying felt cruel to both of us. Watching her gather her things felt surreal. She moved through our home like someone walking through a museum of their own memories, touching objects with a tenderness that made everything hurt more. When she paused at the doorway, she looked back at me with an expression I couldn't decipher, part sorrow, part regret, part relief. Her last words before she left were simple. "I never wanted to hurt you. But harm doesn't require intent. It only requires action." In the weeks that followed, silence filled the spaces she used to occupy. Sometimes I woke up expecting to hear her making coffee, only to remember the truth seconds later. Other times, I felt a strange emptiness sitting in the passenger seat of my own life, waiting for direction that no longer existed. Friends asked what happened, and I found myself unable to explain it in a way that didn't sound absurd. How do you summarize discovering your girlfriend was engaged to someone else? How do you explain the kind of betrayal that fractures your sense of identity, not just your heart? Yet amid the grief, a quiet clarity began to grow. I realized how much of myself I had invested in a relationship that didn't truly exist, not the way I believed it did. I realized that healing wasn't about forgetting her, but about rediscovering who I was before her choices reshaped my world. I realized that trust, once broken so profoundly, demands not repair but rebirth. And slowly, piece by piece, I began rebuilding, not the life we had, but the life I had put aside while trying to love someone who no longer knew how to love honestly. There is no neat moral to betrayal, no clean lesson wrapped in a bow. But there is one truth I learned in the aftermath. People can live two lives at once, but they can only inhabit one heart. And when someone chooses a life that excludes you, the greatest act of strength is learning to choose yourself again, quietly, steadily, without apology.